signed up for this training, so I'm sure a lot of guys are still going to fill in as we go. But we do have a lot to cover, so we really can't hold on any longer. Today we're going to go over part 2 of Network Basics or Networking 101. It's going to be, we're going to be covering hardwired networks, network infrastructure, a few different ways to call it. But basically, last week we covered wireless. Today we're covering everything that's connected via hardwire. So let's get rolling here. My name is Chris Scanlan, and I'm a sales engineer here at Capital Sales. So if you guys have any questions after this training or any design specifics, any project specifics, feel free to give me a call. I'd be happy to chat with your about projects with you or just general questions. So we're going to get you guys thinking a little bit this morning. I want you guys to take a peek at this drawing, and is it designed correctly? Okay. Is it going to work correctly? Is it designed correctly? Or is there a better way to do it? So right now we have the WAN connection, which is the wide area network or the internet, going into a router, and out of the router goes to 3 cables, 1 to each switch, and off the switch goes to your devices, whether that's an access point, whether that's computer, you know, whatever it is. So is this correct? Or is this correct? The answer is this one is correct, okay? The reason being, and we're going to get into it a little more later, but the switch has a lot more network bandwidth, a backbone. Everything should be through the switch, only one connection to the router. The router is not your head end. The router is just giving out DHCP addressing and giving out some info, okay? The switch actually should be what is holding the most of what your network is. So internet goes into the router, 1 cable comes out of the router to your main switch, and if you have any other switches off of that, every switch then connects to the main switch. Now let's get into something that you guys are running more and more into, okay? It's called double NAT, where you have 2 routers in a network. You guys may have ran into this without even knowing it. Most ISPs, or internet service providers, are not just handing out a modem anymore like they used to. It's now a modem router combo, right? Because they want to, they feel that they can. This causes a major issue when you actually want to go in and put in a quality router, right? Because we know that ISP companies buy the flavor of the month, which is on sale for the cheapest unit. The problem is it's that price for a reason, right? It works for connecting a couple devices, maybe anything else, but is it really a quality router? No. And when a company, a CI company comes in, they need a lot more out of their network than what that router can handle. So what do? You sell them a nicer router. But now you've got a router behind a router. Looks a lot like this, right? You got the internet, ISP's modem router, and then you have your router. But that can cause issues. You may have internet, but you've got other things that don't communicate. And what happens is you have a double NAT issue. And what you see is the WAN connection comes into the ISP's modem router combo. And then what happens is the modem router combo does not redistribute that WAN info. What it does is it turns it into a LAN info, local area network. And then that local area network is feeding to the router. Now the problem is your second router does not have the correct WAN info. It doesn't have the public IP address or anything else. What it has is the local area network from the first router going into the second router, which can cause a lot of issues. Okay, and we can really get into technical stuff, but right now we really can't because we only have 20 minutes. So this is the 101 version. You can't have a local area network. If you have a local area network coming in to the WAN port of a 192.168.1.2 address, that is a local area network address, not a public address. Feeding your router, you're going to have double NAT issues. You can see it right there. You've got 2 networks inside of each other. Bad, bad thing to do. Okay? What you should have is WAN info, ISP's modem or modem router combo should be bypassing that WAN info public address, so it's WAN data still, not LAN data, to your router. You only have one router now. You don't have two. Public address is, again, giving the router. Same address outside is what you should be getting inside to your router. Best option, call your ISP, your internet service provider, and have them supply a modem. Just to warn you, they will probably gripe and moan and tell you no, they can't until you ask them 2 or 3 times. Reason being is, if they pull out that modem router and put in just a modem, they're losing money because they charge the customer an extra $5, $10, $15 a month for that modem router versus a standard modem. So they're going to say no because they want money, right? Everybody wants money in this world. So, but the best way to do that is to fix it by getting a standard modem. Some ISP companies, literally, the way they have that set up, they can't. If you want this ISP, you have to use a modem router. So what's the next best option? Set the modem router into bridge mode. Okay? A lot of times you may not be able to get into the ISP's modem router combo. What you have to do is call the ISP, and they may have to do that themselves. They may have to remote in and get that switch, set that to bridge mode. If they still say they can't, then tell them they have to set it to a DMZ. That is the third option, and this is from best, better, and good. You know, it's DMZ should fix most of your issues. Okay, it's better to do bridge mode. It's best to just get an ISP, just a standard modem, and that should fix your double NAT issue. Now let's get into routers, gigabit routers. Again, we only have 20 minutes, so I can't get into a lot. Router is what's going to dish out all your IP addresses, hold that network info for you, static leases, and manage some of your network. You can do this as well with managed switches, and we will get into that in a bit. I'm going to go over a couple gigabit routers that we carry. Luxel is a major line that we carry, and it's a major line in the CI world. So we're going to talk about mainly Luxel today. We also do have Ingenious, but Luxel's been much more dominant in what we do, so we're going to talk a little more about Luxel. The new AVR 4500, if you guys have used Luxel, you've probably heard of the 4400. This is going to replace it, and it is actually already replacing it now. The 4400 is end of life. We do have a few on sale left of the XBR series. The AVR 4400 is completely gone. Okay, it's out of stock. The 4500 is what you will get. What you get with the 4500 is upgraded hardware. More processing power, more RAM, bigger, better, faster. Okay, just a little beefier, what networks need and what they demand. It's positioned between the new 3100 and the AVR 5000. What this router is going to have is it now has router limits built into it. So it's got firewalls. It also is going to have DOMATs built into it, so remote management. We're going to get into a little bit of that, or we already did a webinar on that earlier, DOMATs and router limits. If you have any questions on that, feel free to reach out to account manager or myself. We can talk a little more later. One thing to keep in mind is speed. This router, even though it's bigger, better, faster, it does still have a max LAN-to-WAN throughput of 500 to 600 megabits per second. Now, a year ago, you had been talking about that. We would have said, yeah, right, like wherever you're going to use 500 to 600 megabits. Well, a lot of people now have a full gigabit coming in or 2 different gigabit lines coming into their house. So 500 to 600 megs, networks change very fast. And the biggest thing I can tell you is do not spec a network to its max when you first install it. You always want to future-proof it because it is really expands fast. So if you say, hey, if you've got 2 options, go with the bigger one because it's going to, in 6 months, you may need that bigger one. Okay, so this one is a 500 to 600 meg router. They're also going to be releasing the AVR 5000 here soon, which is a full WAN-to-LAN gigabit throughput, which means you do have a full gigabit. It's not 500 to 600 megs, okay? It now has a 1.2 gigahertz processor, dual dedicated WAN ports. That's dual full WAN-to-LAN gigabit LAN ports, okay? So you could have 2 gigs coming into this with load balancing. We also have 5 LAN ports, USB 3.0 sharing, a DMLA server, and mid-Q2 release. It's going to be releasing here shortly. Okay, I know they're going to beta testing now with it. So now let's get into wireless. A lot of times you guys may not be doing a large system. You want to do, we kind of talked about this last week, small wireless router, maybe a couple access points. You got the 3100, which replaced the 1750. concurrent dual band wireless built-in controller. We talked about that last week. If you guys have questions on that, feel free to reach out. That wireless controller can support up to 2 additional APs, access points, okay? It's a 4x4 AC Wave 2. It also has a 3.0 file sharing DLNA server. MSRP is $440. Also, we have the 1200. I'm going to fly through these guys, replace the 600, current dual band, built-in wireless controller as well. So it still have that. We got additional APs. This is only a 2x2, and it's a 2.0 file sharing, but it's $220. Definitely priced right for your jobs. So let's get into managed switches, what they are, managed versus unmanaged, so on and so forth. Okay. So first of all, let's go into some switch types. What is the difference when you look at switches, right? And if you guys are first looking at switches, you may realize that there's a lot more options in switches than you may have thought about. Little things like, what is fast Ethernet? You may, and this is maybe worded differently, fast Ethernet versus gigabit. Fast Ethernet is 10 by 100, meaning it's can only do 100 megs a second. Gigabit is a gigabit a second, okay, per port. Unmanaged, managed, PoE, and number of ports. Okay, those are some of the main things you want to look at when you're picking a switch. Also, when you get into managed switches, there's some other things to keep in mind. Is it a layer 2 or layer 3 switch? And what's the differences, right? Layer 3 switch can be used for routing, which means you don't need a router if you're doing a layer 3 switch if you want to set it up that way for larger networks. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, it doesn't hurt to get a layer 3 switch and then put a router in line and just not set it up for routing. Okay. So, biggest question is, what switch should I use? Honestly, picking the switch is almost more important than picking the router, because that, again, like I said before, that's really the backbone. That's going to be your workhorse, is the switch for your network. Unmanaged, it's plug and play. There's no IP addresses. It's a basic workhorse, right? For some devices and some small networks, an unmanaged switch would work fine, okay? But it's very limited. You want to, and we'll go into a little of that in a bit, or in more you kind of understand is when you want to use a managed switch. That's the bigger question. And you'll find out that more times than not, you're going to actually want to use a managed switch. Let's get into managed and what you get from it. Obviously, it's managed, so you have configuration interface. So you have the ability to get in with the web, console, SSH, different ways of setting this switch up. You also have statistics, monitoring, troubleshooting. If there's a network issue, there's usually logs in a managed switch that you have the ability to look at and see what the issue is. You also have the ability to do VLANs. Now, this is a huge one, guys. VLANs. What's a VLAN? What's a guest network? It's actually a VLAN. It's a separate network inside of your main network, right? And that's a VLAN. And if you want to do VLANs through access points, you're going to need a managed switch. So if you want to use do guest networks, which are a VLAN, again, you need to use managed switches. Okay? Guest network, managed switch. Let's just remember that right now. Guest network, managed switch. All right? Another big one, spanning tree broadcast management. Okay, that's a mouthful. And what that really is, there's a lot of things in spanning tree, but one of the big ones is loop protection. How many of you guys, and I'm running into this with somebody right now, how many of you guys installed Sonos? You got all these people that are building wireless broadcasts that want to do their own thing, right? They want to create their own network. So this Sonos piece can add to this Sonos piece because it's a DIY product. Well, the problem is a lot of times it's very hard to disable that broadcast, that own specific network. With Sonos, it's called SonosNet. They're not the only ones to do this. I'm not singling out Sonos. I'm just using them as an example. And then all of a sudden you plug those things into your hardwired network or connect those to your house wireless. What happens when you connect two of those guys together? You create a service loop, a loop. And what happens? It can take down your full network because data just keeps looping around. And next thing you know, it bogs down and takes down your network via a network loop. What can take care of that is spanning tree broadcast management. What that does is that actually, in a simplified manner, looks at every device, looks at communication that the devices are coming from and where they're going, and it can actually tell if this is being broadcasted multiple times, and it will actually put it into a management saying if this is being broadcasted, I don't want the other broadcasts to get through, okay, which will strengthen your network. And that's, again, there's a lot of other stuff that goes into that, but this is Basics 101. Spanning tree protocol will fix a lot of service loop issues, okay? Also, QoS, quality of service. You guys ever need any VoIP phones, anything, sometimes IGMP management, things for HD over IP is a huge thing that's coming out now, right? Get rid of the old matrix switchers and you want to use HD over IP. QoS is, some QoS features are in there, IGMP and different things. We're not going to go into everything. Again, it's a 20-minute webinar. The next question is PoE. What is PoE? Power over Ethernet and routing for larger networks. So a lot of things you guys get with managed switches, okay? If you don't know whether you should go with an unmanaged versus a managed, it's always safer to go with the managed because you can set things up. You go with an unmanaged, next you know you're stuck with the unmanaged. I know they cost more, but it's going to help you in the long run. Best practice, 3 or more. Your 24-port switches, you need at least one managed switch, which means every 3 or 4 you're going to want. I recommend always start with managed switch, but at least 3 or 4 unmanaged switches you want in a managed switch for sure. Next one is PoE. Let's get into what PoE is real quick. PoE is one cable, provides both power and data. Okay, you got cameras, you got access points, you got things that need to be powered. But you don't have to run a separate power cable to run them. It's all ran over the Cat5 or Cat6, whatever it is. Distance is your standard 100 meters. That's kind of the standard rule for any network run, is 100 meters. Does not require a licensed electrician to pull. This is huge. You want to run power to things, most of the time you need a licensed electrician to do it. You don't need to do that with PoE. It can be used as a power source, can be a standalone injector or a switch, PoE switch. When using PoE, there is no degradation of performance, meaning if it's a 10 by 100 signal, you're going to get that 10 by 100. If it's a gigabit, you're going to get that gigabit. It's not going to degrade that signal by doing PoE. Now, another thing that you guys may not know is there's different types of PoE. There's legacy, which is your standard supply power over the line. There's standard PoE now, which you will see PoE or PoE plus. You guys may not know what PoE plus is. PoE is 15.4 watts, okay, per port. PoE plus has the ability to do 30 watts per port, and it's backwards compatible. You really want to keep in mind what devices you're powering, okay? All these are based on standard 48 volts. Some devices actually say they use PoE, but they're not using 48 volts. If that is the case, you cannot use a PoE switch, okay? You need to use the supplied PoE injector that comes with it, okay? You always want to use a full speed switch. What that means is the switch backplane speed should be double the number of ports. So if it's a 24-port gigabit switch, and this is one of the reasons you want to use a switch over a router, okay, because you can take this same idea and put it towards a router. The switch is the backbone, right? I keep saying that. And a full speed switch, double the number of ports. So if it is a 24-port switch, you're going to 24-port gigabit switch, you will get a 48 gigabit per second backbone because it's 24 up, 24 down. If you did that on a router, how many ports does a router normally have? 4? What do you want to do? You want to use a 48-port gigabit backbone, or do you want to use an 8 gig backbone? All right, one of the major things. And also keep in mind, we talked about PoE, and if let's say a switch is PoE plus, right? This is a managed PoE plus switch, but you want to keep in mind that there is always a power budget, meaning it's 250 watts or 220 watts PoE switch. That is 24 ports at 9.6 watts, meaning you can power a PoE on all 24 ports, but it's only 9.61 or 9.16 watts. You use 14 devices, you can supply up to 15 watts, or if you've got, let's say, 7 high-powered access points that are going to be able to get up to that almost 30 watts of power, you can only use 7 of those ports for PoE plus. So you really want to make sure that you know the requirements of your devices. If they're cameras, if they're access points, if they're keypads on the walls, whatever it is that you're powering, you want to make sure you know how much power they're going to take, because you don't want to burn your switch out or not be able to supply enough power to them. Okay. Now with Luxel, there's a couple options. We've got AV series switches, and we've got standard switches. In the AV series, there's 8 ports PoE plus power management. There's gigabit routers. We've got 12-port PoE switches, 16-port unmanaged, 24-port unmanaged, 26-port with 16 PoE, 26-port with 24-port PoE, and that one also comes with a 10-gig stackable port, meaning you can stack multiple switches. We'll get into that in a second. Or we have the security IP IT-style options, which is basically the same lineup except for it is in a front, the jacks are on the front of the switch. We also have a big guy, 52-port PoE plus switch. Okay, you may be saying, hey, when am I going to use this? But more often than not, you may find yourself getting up to that. Switches and ports get used up real quick, especially if you're doing things like HD over IP. You've got 10 sources, 20 TVs. Now you got 30 of those ports burnt up. You have to jump to this port, the switch, or go with 2 24-port stack switches. Okay, so they've got the 5248 and the 7048. The difference is the 7048 is stackable. It also has 740 watts of power, okay, that can be pushed via PoE or PoE plus. So you stack 2 7048s together, you can actually do up to 16 of these, and it becomes one big switch. Every time you stack a switch, you're adding on to the first switch. It's not creating 2, 3, 4 switches. It's actually making it one large switch with a 10 gigabit backbone between each one. So you actually now have the ability to do, right now, here is 2 24-port switches stacked together. It is one IP address, one place to manage it. Also, you don't need to worry about VLANs going between the switches because it becomes one switch. Okay, much easier to manage. If you ever are going to use more than one switch or more than one managed switch, I always recommend getting stacking switches and stack them. A little more expensive, but the configuration process is so much easier and so much more powerful. Go the little extra mile, get a stacking switch. Okay. Now, let's get into what stacking, how they work. Switch IDs. You're going to say which one is your main switch that you're going to be logging into for ports, and then your switch ID below that. Let's get into some troubleshooting features, okay, because you need to know if something goes wrong in a network, how can you troubleshoot it? There are a lot of things. We can't go over everything today, but we're going to go over some of the basics. Physical layer 1 troubleshooting, things like what is my IP address? Being able to find out what your IP address can tell you a lot, okay, about a network and what the issue may be to help you isolate the issue. First and foremost, these should be pretty straightforward, but you'd be amazed how many calls I get and find out that it maybe a device got unplugged or a network cable got unplugged. Is it connected correctly? Is the cable terminated correctly? Just because your Cat5 tester tests out well, that may not mean those connections are good enough to actually pass a good data signal, okay? So big one, terminated correctly, which can become a bad Ethernet cable. Even though that Ethernet cable came in the box, you didn't make it, does not mean that it's a good cable, okay? A big indicator is what are the LED lights doing on the back of that jack? There's green and amber lights on most network jacks. What is it doing? That can tell you a lot. Also, if it's a PoE device, is it the correct PoE, right? So let's get into internet troubleshooting. Does my device have an IP address? Remember I stated an IP address tells you a lot. First one, can I log into the router? Does the router have a WAN address? Can I ping the router's default gateway? Can I ping the 8.8.8.8, which is Google? And then can I ping the actual web, which is www.google.com? One big thing, if you do find an issue, only power cycle the device that has the issue. Don't just go in and shut everything down in the network if you have an issue, okay? That doesn't fix anything. You want to make sure that you can isolate the issue, isolate the device that's causing the issue. So how do I know, what do I use when I do my IP? First, check connections, check power, etc. If your IP address is 169.254, that means there's no DHCP server on the network. That means the device is giving itself an IP address, okay? Definitely an indicator. If it is getting an IP address, is it the correct IP address? The way to be able to verify that is to go into the router or the switch that is doing the routing and figure out if it's DHCP or static. Actually, that would be in your device. Is it DHCP or static? If it is DHCP, is it on the correct subnet? Is it getting the correct info from the router? If it is the correct subnet, awesome. If using DHCP, is it in the correct DHCP server settings? Meaning, you have a range. I can do IP address .1 to .30 or .50 to .100. Is it the correct DHCP range? If it's not, you may have two routers in your system that you don't know about. This happens more often than not as well. Somebody threw in an end user, put something else in the network. They wanted an Apple airport, they wanted something, and they threw in the wrong thing, and they only have two routers in the system, which can really cause havoc. One issue I've seen actually happen a lot, retrofit projects. There are many different ways to broadcast signal. Copper, there's copper, there's fiber, there is coax, there's MoCA. And MoCA, I have seen, MoCA can be a great way for a retrofit, but I've also seen it cause issues, wreak havoc on systems. When you use MoCA, it's broadcasting your signal over your coax, right, instead of copper. I've seen where now all of a sudden there is no RF filter on the outside of the house or the facility, and the neighbor has a MoCA signal as well. And next thing you know, you're picking up IP addresses. You're actually logged in. There's two networks on the same over that one coax between the two houses. So just be careful, okay? The house issue may not be inside the house itself. So you really want to diagnose that signal. And I'm really trying to hurry, guys. I know we're running a little late. So to isolate the issue, maybe the speeds are slow. Are they wired or wireless? If only on the wireless, is it on all APs? If it's not, swap the APs. See if it follows the AP. If it does follow the AP, you may have either faulty IP or incorrect configuration on that access point. If it doesn't, check the cables or the switch ports, okay? If everything's yes, then check, change channel, change frequencies, check the signal strength, a lot of different options. And again, this is now troubleshooting more wireless network, or is it on the hardwired? Is it a hardwired issue? So some tools to use, discovering network devices. You want to be able to make sure you can find devices on the network, find devices on other subnets, duplicate IP addresses, duplicate MAC addresses, and just quick documentation of your network. There's many ways to be able to do this. There's some really nice free tools. Advanced IP Scanner, Angry IP Scanner, LAN Scan, Fing. There's a lot of tools out there. If you just Google it, for network IP scanners, you're going to find a ton. Okay. Here's a quick view of it. Advanced IP Scanner. You hit the scan button on your computer. It's going to scan your whole network and pull up every device on there. Very great way to diagnose an issue real quick. See if there's two devices that have a multiple of the same IP address, different MAC addresses, so on and so forth. Okay. Also, there are a lot of other videos out there, a lot of other training stuff. Today we went over a very short period. We had a lot of stuff to jam at 20 minutes. That's why it went almost 30 minutes. Actually 30 minutes on the dot, so I apologize, guys. I went 10 minutes over. and I know you guys have probably more questions than anything else. We're going to start answering questions in a second. Before we do, Luxel has some very great IP networking courses. Here are some of the lineups right now that they have. They have a lot more than that. I would definitely recommend hopping on there. Their webinars, their how-to videos. So, or you can give me a call and we definitely chat some more on specific projects or going more in depth on a certain thing. So I just want to thank you guys. And before we get going here, we also have some sales going on real quick at Capital. The new 4500s, the XBR and ABR series, are on sale. They're replacing those 4400s. We also have a closeout sale going on the 4400 because it is getting moved up to the 45. We also have outdoor access points, and we have outdoor wireless bridge kits on sale. So we have all of those are on sale right now for a limited time at Capital. I really want to stress, guys, that XBR 4400 router is well supplies last. We are getting down on supplies, so if you want to take advantage of that, you need to call in very soon to your local account manager at Capital and get that going. With that, I'm going to leave this page up because a lot of times I jump to a question page and you guys keep asking what is the promo that's going on, what are the sales. I'm going to leave that up. I'm going to jump into the questions, guys. So again, for you guys that have to hop off, thanks for taking the time. And if you guys want to stay on, maybe listen to some questions, maybe we'll answer some questions of yourself. So the first one is, let's see here. I'm going to skip the first two because they're more one's a joke. The other one is just call me afterwards. The next one's I'm running out of time. Is the rest of this product info? No, that we had more, but for any of you guys that are able to have to jump off here, this is recorded. Also, the PowerPoint is on our website. All the links are either on our Capital Sales YouTube channel or on the web or on our website. So the first question I see is, when do you use a router and a separate switch, and is it just based on the number of ports needed? Not exactly the number of ports needed. That is definitely a deciding factor, but also how much demand is it? Is it only 4 devices? If it's only 4 devices, then yeah, you can plug that into the router. If everything's going to be wireless, again, you can look at a router, but anything here, hardwired is always better than wireless. I know everybody's trying to go wireless, but I keep stressing that. I said that last time. I'm going to say it this time. Hardwired is always better than wireless because you take out the variables. You take out RF interference. You take out anything. If you have a hardwired connection there, you know it's going to work. And if there is an issue, you know exactly what the issue is, right? Bad cable, bad device, bad port. It's much easier to troubleshoot on a hardwired network than it is wireless, okay? So there is a few different things to take a peek at, but one of the big ones, yeah, I mean, ports are definitely a big part of it on when to jump from a router to a switch. Any other questions? I mean, we've got very few questions on here right now, which is maybe I answered all your guys' questions during the webinar. That would be a first. Normally, the webinars go for 20 minutes, and it's 40 minutes to answer a question. So before I hop off, guys, is there any other questions? And if there is not, I know how after these webinars we hang up, questions start flooding in, or throughout the day you've got questions. Feel free to reach out to your local account manager or reach out to myself. We'd be happy to talk to you guys about your project, to answer your questions. Also, guys like Luxel, they're able to answer questions. They do have a good support team. They do also do network designs as well. We can help with network designs here at Capital. Luxel can also help with network designs. Okay. Luxel is not the only line that we carry. We do also carry Ingenious. Luxel there's a better support at Luxel, and they're higher demand. We sell a lot more Luxel than we do Ingenious, so we like the guys who are Luxel. So it's that's what this webinar is more about right now. Let's see here. We do have one other question. One more. On smaller routers, is there a designated port for the APs? I'm thinking you're talking about the new Luxel XBR 40, XWR 3100 and XWR 1200. No, there isn't specific ports. It can plug into any one of the ports on the back. It can also plug into a switch downstream from that. So it doesn't have, those IPs don't even have to be plugged into that router per se, but the wireless controller is built into the router and it can run off of any port. So If you design, let's say you have a bigger hardwired network, but you need 2 additional APs, you would run the router, 1 cable out of the router to a switch, preferably a managed switch, especially if you want a guest network, then you have to do a managed switch because you would have to do VLANs, and you can have your APs plugged into that switch. So many ways to configure, and depending on the size and or what your demand is, you'll want to make sure that you have the ability to get into and do APs or managed switches or whatever you need. So if you have questions or you're not sure when to jump from a managed or unmanaged, or from an unmanaged to a managed, give us a call, give Luxel a call, give your account manager a call. We will be able to help assist and help you figure out what would be the best decision for that. Any info on UVerse router bypass? That is something we'll take offline because I'm not going to get into how to get into the actual settings of specific routers. You would have to call and we could maybe walk you through that, or give UVerse a call. They would also be able to help with that. Because if I start with UVerse, then we've got FiOS, then we've got all the other ones that will come up. I'm not going to get into that right this second. When you talk about replacing residential ISP router, are you referring to the router or AP devices? Router, I think you're talking about AP devices. Maybe you're mentioning wireless router. Correct me if I'm wrong. Whether it's a hardwired router or a wireless router, it's still the router. Okay. And yes, I do recommend if you're doing anything with the network, you want to take advantage of and manage that network. That's why we're having this webinar. And you can't have a rogue access point on that network going to a different router or a different network altogether. It's going to cause a lot of headaches, a lot of issues. So I'm talking really about both. I'm talking about replacing router and access point because a lot of times those are, when you're coming from an ISP, it's the same thing. And just going to the modem. Any other questions, guys? Well, thanks, guys, for hopping on. If any questions pop up after the webinar, definitely feel free to reach out to me or your account manager. We'll be happy to answer them or talk about any upcoming projects, any designs. It's definitely, I really stress with networking, if you have questions, give us a call before you go inspect and or sell a product. We want to make sure it works, okay? Last thing we want is a bad taste in your mouth because the product was not the correct one to spec, okay? So we're here to help you guys. Reach out. It is not a burden on us. We love to help. We love to chat. We love to talk about projects. That's what we're here for. So definitely give us a call. Again, thanks, guys, for hopping on, taking time on your busy day, and I hope to hear from you guys soon.